I am Elara, 32, and the day my grandfather, Arthur Finch, passed away, the air in the stately Finch Manor, usually thick with a quiet grandeur, became suffocating, heavy with unspoken expectations and the scent glow of lilies. Arthur Finch was a man built of old money and quiet power, a titan of industry whose fortune spanned generations, built on steel and shrewd investments. Growing up, he was the closest thing I had to a truly loving paternal figure. My own parents, well, they were more concerned with maintaining appearances, with their social standing, and with ensuring their position within the vast Finch empire. They saw me as a means to an end, another chip in their intricate game of familial politics, a pawn in the endless quest for more influence, and, most importantly, more inheritance. My grandfather, however, saw me. He saw the budding artist, the quiet observer, the girl who preferred dusty library corners to glittering social events. He encouraged my passions, slipping me art supplies, lending me rare books, and indulging my endless questions about the world beyond the gilded cage of our family estate. He was my confidant, my mentor, my silent champion. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. His passing, though anticipated after a long illness, still tore a gaping hole in my carefully constructed world. It wasn't just the loss of a loved one. It was the loss of my only true ally within the Finch family. I mourned him deeply, genuinely, unlike the performative grief displayed by most of my relatives, who seemed more preoccupied with their perfectly tailored black suits and the potential shakeup of the will. The will. That was the elephant in every gilded room, the unspoken tension beneath every hushed condolence. Everyone knew Arthur Finch was immensely wealthy. Everyone also knew he had a complex relationship with his children, my aunts and uncles, who were more interested in spending his money than in understanding the values that had built his empire. The reading of the will was a spectacle, held in the grand library of the manor, a room usually reserved for quiet contemplation, now buzzing with thinly veiled avarice. Mr. Abernathy, my grandfather's long-standing, impeccably dressed lawyer, a man whose stern demeanor usually commanded immediate respect, cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension. My parents, Aunt Beatrice, Uncle George, and, most notably, my cousin Marcus, were all present. Marcus. His presence was particularly jarring. He was Arthur Finch's grandnephew, a distant relative who had only reconnected with the family a few months prior, seemingly out of nowhere, after years of absolute silence. He had arrived back in our lives like a sudden, unwelcome storm, charming the socks off everyone, particularly my grandfather in his weakened state, with tales of his supposed entrepreneurial successes and a newfound appreciation for family. I'd always felt something was off about him, a predatory glint in his carefully orchestrated charm, but my warnings to my grandfather had been dismissed as childish jealousy by my parents. Mr. Abernathy began to read, his voice droning through the legalese. Vast sums of money, properties, businesses, all meticulously detailed. My heart hammered against my ribs, not out of greed, but out of the desperate hope that my grandfather, in his final act, would have acknowledged our bond, our unique connection. He had always told me, Elara, true value isn't measured in gold, but in connection, in meaning. I clung to that, hoping for a personal message, a small, significant token. Then came the bombshell. To my grandnephew, Marcus Finch, Mr. Abernathy read, his voice steady. I bequeath the entirety of my estate, including all financial assets, properties, and business holdings. A collective gasp rippled through the room. My parents' faces, moments before contorted in thinly veiled anticipation, contorted further, this time in disbelief and rage. Aunt Beatrice openly scoffed, her carefully composed facade crumbling. Uncle George sputtered, almost choking on his expensive tie. Marcus, however, sat perfectly still, a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips, a triumphant glint in his eyes. My own reaction was a wave of pure shock, then a profound, aching disappointment. Everything? To Marcus? A man who had reappeared out of the blue? It felt like a betrayal, A final cruel twist. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Was this my grandfather's true last word to me? Had I been so wrong about our bond? Mr. Abernathy continued almost as an afterthought, and to my granddaughter, Elara Harper, I leave this. He held up a single, plain, cream-colored envelope. My name, Elara Harper, was written in my grandfather's familiar, elegant script. That was it. No mention of anything else, no grand gestures, no acknowledgement of the years we had shared. Just one envelope. A ripple of condescending laughter spread through the room. My Aunt Beatrice snickered openly. My mother shot me a pitying, yet strangely triumphant, glance. "Typical Elara," I heard her whisper to my father. "Always the sentimental one, never the practical one. What could an old envelope possibly hold?" Marcus, too, let out a soft, mocking chuckle, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and contempt. It was clear they believed I had been utterly disinherited, that my grandfather had left me nothing of value, perhaps as a final, subtle reprimand for my unconventional nature. My face burned with humiliation, but I forced myself to walk forward, my spine stiff, to accept the envelope from Mr. Abernathy. It felt thin, insubstantial, almost flimsy in my hand. I clutched it tightly, my fingers tracing the familiar loops of my grandfather's handwriting. The weight of their scorn pressed down on me, but beneath it, a quiet, almost imperceptible flicker of something else ignited, a familiar tingle of intuition. Grandfather always had a flair for the dramatic, a penchant for riddles and hidden meanings. This couldn't be all. It felt too deliberately dismissive for him. He was a man of immense purpose, and this felt incomplete. Back in my small apartment, a rented space far removed from the grandeur of the Finch Manor, I finally opened the envelope. Inside, there wasn't a bank statement, no key to a safety deposit box, no cryptic message of love. Instead, there was an old hand-drawn map. It was drawn on aged parchment, the edges slightly frayed, the lines faded in places. It depicted a winding path through dense, unfamiliar woods, marked with strange symbols and cryptic notations that looked like my grandfather's own unique shorthand. There was an X marked precisely where the path seemed to end, and a small, almost invisible inscription at the bottom. For Elara. The true inheritance is not always where you expect to find it. Seek meaning, my dear. My initial reaction was a bewildered laugh. A map? This was it? This was what the great Arthur Finch had left his beloved granddaughter? The family's laughter echoed in my ears, amplified by the absurd reality of the situation. It seemed they were right. It was a cruel joke. But then, as I studied the map more closely, tracing the faded lines with my finger, a different feeling began to take root. Oh. The peculiar symbols, the way certain landmarks were subtly exaggerated, the intricate, almost artistic detail of the trees and rivers, it all felt incredibly familiar. It was his hand, his unique way of seeing the world, reflected in every stroke. This wasn't just any old map. It was his map. And the inscription, "The true inheritance is not always where you expect to find it. Seek meaning, my dear." Those words, so perfectly aligned with his lifelong philosophy, resonated deeply within me, cutting through the sting of disappointment. It was a message, not a joke. A challenge. A final adventure, just for me. My grandfather wouldn't have left me nothing. He wouldn't have subjected me to such public humiliation without a deeper purpose. He knew how my family operated, their greed, their vindictiveness. This map, this peculiar, seemingly worthless item, was his final brilliant cryptic move. And I, Elara, his quiet artist, was the only one who might understand it. I was going to follow that map. No matter where it led. The map lay spread out on my worn wooden table, a stark contrast to the modern laptop and art supplies that usually occupied the space. Its faded parchment, etched with my grandfather's distinctive hand, pulsed with a quiet energy, a silent challenge that resonated deep within me. The initial sting of humiliation from the will reading had subsided, replaced by a surge of curious determination. My family had laughed, dismissed it as a final, eccentric whim of a dying old man, a meaningless trinket left to the sentimental granddaughter. But they hadn't known Arthur Finch like I did. They hadn't understood his penchant for riddles, his layered metaphors, his profound belief that true value lay beyond the superficial. This map, this peculiar, seemingly worthless item, was his final, brilliant, cryptic move. And I, Elara, his quiet artist, was the only one who might understand it. The map depicted a dense, winding path through what appeared to be a vast, undeveloped tract of woodland, far from the meticulously manicured grounds of the Finch estate. The landscape was rendered with an almost artistic flair, exaggerated trees, flowing rivers, and subtle topographical cues that suggested specific, yet unfamiliar terrain. Cryptic notations, written in my grandfather's own unique shorthand, dotted the pathways, a small sketch of a bird, a stylized drawing of a compass rose pointing slightly askew, a series of seemingly random numbers. It was a treasure map, yes, but one designed by a brilliant mind, intended only for a recipient who knew how to read between the lines, how to decipher his particular brand of intellectual whimsy. I spent the next few days immersed in research. The symbols on the map, I quickly realized, weren't random. The bird, a stylized wren, was a motif from a rare old book of folklore my grandfather had once read to me, a story about hidden truths. The compass rose, pointing slightly off north, was a subtle nod to his early days as a surveyor, always reminding me that true north wasn't always magnetic north, but often found by looking at the stars, or by trusting your own internal compass. The numbers, when cross-referenced with old astronomical charts I found in one of his forgotten personal journals, corresponded to specific celestial alignments, hinting at optimal times for travel or perhaps even suggesting a hidden direction. He had once told me, "The universe whispers its secrets, Elara, if you know how to listen." This map was his final whisper. My initial attempts to pinpoint the location were frustrating. The map was abstract, lacking modern geographical markers. But by meticulously cross-referencing the hand-drawn features with old geological surveys of the region, focusing on the unique river bends and hill contours that were less likely to change over time, I began to narrow down the general area. It pointed towards a vast, protected forest reserve about a 2-hour drive from the city, a place known for its challenging terrain and sparse visitation. It was the kind of place my grandfather would have loved, remote and untouched. I decided to embark on this quest alone, a conscious decision to separate myself from the pervasive influence of my family. They would never understand. Their world was one of balance sheets and property deeds, not cryptic maps and hidden meanings. They would only mock me, dismiss me as fanciful. This journey was deeply personal, a final communion with the grandfather who had always seen me, and a chance to prove to myself, more than anyone else, that his faith in me was not misplaced. Preparing for the trip was a logistical challenge. I packed durable hiking gear, a reliable compass, a GPS device as a backup, plenty of water, high-energy snacks, and a first aid kit. I also brought my sketchbook and a set of portable watercolors. My grandfather had always encouraged me to document my experiences, to capture the essence of moments. This felt like a pilgrimage, a physical manifestation of my emotional journey. The morning I set out was crisp and clear, the air hinting at the approaching winter. I drove my old, trusty sedan, packed to the brim, the map clutched tightly in my hand. As I left the city behind, the towering skyscrapers slowly giving way to rolling hills and eventually dense forest, a sense of quiet anticipation settled over me. The further I drove, the more the world of the Finch family, with its polished surfaces and stifling expectations, faded into the background. I was entering my grandfather's world, a world of nature, quiet contemplation, and hidden wonders. I arrived at the edge of the forest reserve late in the morning. The trailhead was unmarked, precisely as my grandfather's map suggested. It was a subtle indicator that this was not a well-trodden path. The forest loomed before me, a vast, imposing expanse of ancient trees, their branches interlaced like a protective canopy. Taking a deep breath, I adjusted my backpack, pulled out the map, and began my trek. The first few hours were challenging. The terrain was rough, the ground uneven, covered with fallen leaves and gnarled roots. A map, while beautiful, was not a precise GPS. I had to rely on my instincts, on the subtle clues my grandfather had embedded within its artistic lines. The compass rose, pointing slightly off true north, was a crucial hint. It wasn't a mistake. It was an instruction to account for magnetic declination, a surveyor's trick he had taught me years ago during one of our summer walks. The sketches of the wren, placed strategically, guided me towards specific, unusual rock formations that mirrored illustrations in his old folklore book, formations I painstakingly sought out. It was a game, a silent dialogue between us, a final lesson from beyond the grave. As I delved deeper into the woods, the silence became profound, broken only by the rustling of leaves underfoot and the occasional call of a distant bird. The air grew colder, heavier with the scent of pine and damp earth. I felt an exhilarating sense of being truly alone, truly independent, something I rarely experienced in my heavily scrutinized life. By late afternoon, the light began to fade, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. A gnawing, insidious worm began to creep into my mind. Was this all a wild goose chase? A sentimental fool's errand? Had my family been right? Was I just wasting my time? Chasing a ghost? My legs ached, my shoulders protested under the weight of my backpack. I found a sturdy, moss-covered rock and sank onto it, pulling out a protein bar. As I ate, my gaze wandered to the map again, searching for a sign, a clue I might have missed. My eyes fell on the series of numbers. I had cross-referenced them with celestial charts, but what if they weren't just about timing? What if they were coordinates, subtly disguised? Using my GPS as a rough guide, I inputted the numbers, adjusting for the intentional offset my grandfather had indicated. The device chirped, recalculating. The destination was closer than I thought, just beyond a particularly dense thicket of old-growth trees. The X on the map, I realized, wasn't just a destination, but a convergence point, a place where all the clues aligned. Renewed with a surge of adrenaline, I pushed through the thicket, branches scraping against my jacket, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The forest floor was uneven, slippery with decaying leaves. And then, as I broke through the last line of trees, it appeared. Nestled in a small, hidden clearing, almost swallowed by the embracing arms of ancient pines, stood a cabin. It was small, rustic, built from dark, weathered logs, its chimney a silent sentinel against the darkening sky. A narrow, overgrown path led to its front door, almost invisible beneath a carpet of moss and fallen leaves. It looked untouched, as if time had paused around it. No smoke rose from the chimney, no lights flickered within. It was exactly as the map suggested, hidden, waiting. My grandfather's secret. My inheritance. The realization hit me with a physical force, taking my breath away. He hadn't left me nothing, he had left me this. The cabin stood in the clearing, a silent sentinel shrouded in the encroaching twilight, exactly as the map had depicted. Its rustic charm, the weathered logs, and the chimney outlined against the deepening sky, felt like a scene plucked from one of my grandfather's cherished old stories, a testament to his love for solitude and the unspoiled wilderness. The air around it was still, almost reverent, as if the forest itself held its breath, guarding the secret within. The narrow, overgrown path leading to its front door was almost entirely consumed by moss and fallen leaves, a clear indication that this was a place rarely, if ever, visited. A surge of emotion, a potent mixture of awe, relief, and profound gratitude, washed over me. He hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't disinherited me. He had orchestrated this, a final, elaborate message, a last adventure just for me. The faint glow of my flashlight pierced the gloom as I approached, my footsteps surprisingly light despite the exhaustion from the day's trek. The front door, made of heavy, dark wood, bore a small, almost invisible inscription carved into its surface, a familiar symbol, a stylized wren, the same one from the map and the old folklore book. My grandfather's personal seal. With trembling hands, I reached for the simple metal latch. It was cold under my touch, but surprisingly, it wasn't locked. The door creaked open slowly, revealing an interior steeped in shadows and the faint, sweet scent of aged wood and forgotten dust. I stepped inside, the sound of my own breath suddenly loud in the profound silence. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a single, spacious room, meticulously preserved, as if my grandfather had simply stepped out for a moment and would return at any second. There was a stone fireplace in the center, a simple wooden table with 2 chairs, a small, unmade cot in one corner, and shelves filled with books and various curiosities. A faint layer of dust coated everything, speaking of years of quietude, but nothing was broken or disheveled. It was as if time had gently preserved this sanctuary. My gaze fell upon the table. On its surface, beneath a thick layer of dust, lay a stack of old letters, neatly tied with a faded ribbon. Beside them, a worn leather-bound photo album, its cover slightly cracked. And next to that, a heavy wooden box, secured with a simple, yet robust clasp. Ow. My heart hammered against my ribs, a mixture of anticipation and reverence. This was it. The true inheritance. I pulled one of the chairs out, its legs scraping softly against the wooden floor, and sat down. My hands, still trembling, reached for the stack of letters first. The top one bore my name, Elara, written in my grandfather's elegant, familiar script. I opened it carefully, the aged paper rustling softly. The letter was dated 10 years ago, meticulously written, a testament to his foresight. In it, he explained everything. He spoke of his growing disillusionment with his children, their insatiable greed, their calculated maneuvering for his fortune. He expressed his disappointment in their inability to see beyond material wealth, their neglect of the very values that had built the family empire. He mentioned Marcus's sudden reappearance, not as a genuine reconciliation, but as a transparent attempt to worm his way into the will, an act he saw through with clear, sharp eyes. I knew, he wrote. But they would stop at nothing to get their hands on my fortune. I knew they would manipulate the will, try to invalidate anything that didn't go their way, or simply strip it bare. And I knew, Elara, that you, my dear, were the only one who truly understood what was important. The only one who saw beyond the gold, to quote, the true legacy. He went on to describe his deep affection for me, his pride in my artistic spirit, and his belief that I possessed a unique kind of wisdom, one that saw the value in hidden things, in quiet moments. I could not leave you everything in the official will, he explained. For they would surely contest it, drag your name through the mud, and ultimately deny you what was truly yours. So, I devised a backup plan, a secret will, a true inheritance for the one who could find it. He explained that for years, he had been discreetly transferring a portion of his wealth, not through official channels that could be easily traced or challenged by his grasping children, but through a network of trusted old associates, loyal friends from his early, more adventurous days. These funds, he explained, were used to acquire this land, parcel by parcel, through a series of shell companies and blind trusts, ensuring its total secrecy. The cabin itself was built by hand, over years, during his solitary fishing trips that no one in the family ever questioned, so absorbed were they in their own lives. He had slowly furnished it, filled it with books and personal mementos that held profound meaning to him, things he didn't want his other descendants to squabble over. He confessed that within this very cabin, concealed within the wooden box, lay not just financial wealth, but also a legal deed, notarized and irrevocably transferring the land and its contents, including millions in precious metals that he had quietly acquired over decades, to me. This deed, he explained, was a living trust, designed to bypass the traditional probate process, making it incredibly difficult to challenge. He had set up a system of coded instructions with his old, trusted legal contacts, who would only acknowledge this trust if approached with a specific passphrase and a unique identifier found within the cabin's contents. "They would tamper with the official will, my dear," he wrote. "But they would never suspect the backup plan. They would never follow the map because they would never believe there was anything of true value in it. They would only see a piece of paper, a joke." Tears streamed down my face, not of sadness but of overwhelming love and gratitude. He had truly understood them, and he had truly understood me. He had foreseen their avarice, their dismissive nature, and had crafted a brilliant, intricate escape route just for me. And this wasn't just about money, it was about his enduring faith in me, his final act of defiance against the very people who had defined his later years with their greed. I picked up the worn leather-bound photo album. Inside, chronologically arranged, were candid photographs of my grandfather's life, many of which I had never seen. His early days as a young, adventurous surveyor in the wilderness, pictures of him with genuine smiles and carefree laughter, before the weight of his empire had settled on his shoulders. There were photos of us together, candid shots he must have taken himself, or had someone else discreetly snap, images of our shared moments, fishing by a hidden stream, reading together in his study, walking through his rose garden, laughing. Moments that felt uniquely ours, intimate memories he had treasured and preserved. Each photo was accompanied by a small, handwritten caption, short anecdotes, and personal reflections, detailing the emotions of that day, his thoughts on my presence, his quiet hopes for my future. These were the true treasures, the emotional legacy I had always craved. Finally, I turned to the heavy wooden box. It was indeed secured with a sturdy clasp. My fingers fumbled with it, my heart pounding in my ears. Sesh. With a click, it opened. Inside, nestled on a bed of old velvet, lay bundles of crisp, aged documents. The top one was a legal deed, clearly titled Irrevocable Living Trust for Elara Harper, notarized and dated years prior. My eyes scanned the contents, details of the land, the various properties, and then, a description of the precious metals. Hundreds of pounds of solid gold and silver bars, meticulously documented, along with certificates of authenticity from reputable refineries. It was a fortune, far more than I had ever dared to dream, secured in a way that seemed impenetrable to legal challenges. Beneath the deed, there were also several thick sealed envelopes, each marked with the name of one of his old trusted associates. These were the coded instructions, the unique identifiers he had mentioned in his letter. As I held the deed in my hand, the weight of the gold and the profound truth of the letters settling over me, a wave of pure, unadulterated triumph washed over me. They had thought they had won. They had laughed at my single envelope, dismissed my inheritance as worthless. But my grandfather, bless his brilliant, eccentric heart, had always been one step ahead. He had built this secret world, this true legacy, and he had trusted me, his quiet artist granddaughter, to find it. This cabin, these letters, these medals, they weren't just a fortune. They were a testament to a love that had defied expectations, a bond that transcended greed, and a brilliance that had outwitted the very people who thought they had control. I was here. I had found it. And the game, I realized with a fierce, quiet resolve, was far from over. This was only the beginning. The initial euphoria of discovery, that profound rush of vindication and validation, slowly settled into a deep, quiet sense of awe as I spent the next few days in the cabin. The silence of the woods was a balm to my soul, a stark contrast to the clamor of the city and the suffocating atmosphere of the Finch Manor. Each morning, I would wake to the gentle light filtering through the trees, the crisp scent of pine filling the small room, and begin the ritual of exploring my grandfather's hidden world. The cabin was more than just a place. It was a living museum of Arthur Finch, a man stripped of his public persona, revealing the true essence of his character. The shelves were indeed filled with books, but not the dry legal texts or financial reports that lined the library back at the manor. Here, there were first editions of classic literature, dusty tomes on botany and astronomy, worn copies of adventure novels, and books on philosophy, particularly Stoicism, a philosophy he had often hinted at embracing. Each book held faint annotations in his hand, marginalia that offered glimpses into his mind, his wit, his deeply contemplative nature. I found a collection of pressed wildflowers, meticulously preserved in a small hand-bound journal, each dated and accompanied by a tiny, eloquent poem about the enduring beauty of nature. This was a side of him the family had never seen, or perhaps had never cared to see. I spent hours poring over the photo album, tracing the familiar faces of my younger self. My grandfather's arm a comforting presence around my shoulders, his eyes reflecting a genuine tenderness. The captions beneath each photo were small narratives, not just dates and places, but his thoughts, his quiet hopes for me, his observations about my burgeoning artistic spirit. One photo showed me, at about 10, sketching furiously in his garden. The caption read, "Elara, my little artist. She sees beauty where others see only weeds. May her vision always remain clear." Another, of us fishing by a quiet stream. Shared silence with Elara, more profound than any conversation. These personal reflections were priceless, confirming the depth of his affection, reassuring me that our bond had been as real and as significant as I had always believed. The wooden box, beyond the legal deed and the precious metals, contained other treasures. There were old, intricately carved wooden chess pieces, clearly handmade, and a half-finished game laid out on a small portable board, as if he had been interrupted mid-move. A faded blue harmonica, which he had occasionally played during our quiet moments, producing melancholic yet beautiful tunes, and, beneath it all, a collection of meticulously polished, unusual rocks, geodes, and small glimmering pieces of quartz, each wrapped in a piece of velvet and accompanied by a small label describing where and when he had found it. These were not expensive gems, but natural wonders, valued for their inherent beauty and the memory of their discovery. It was a poignant reminder of his belief that true value wasn't always measured in monetary terms. The legal deed, along with the detailed inventory of the precious metals, was undeniably real. The land, a sprawling 200 acres, was legally transferred to me through the irrevocable living trust, bypassing the traditional probate system, making it incredibly difficult for anyone to challenge. The precious metals, hundreds of pounds of gold and silver bars, were stored in a discreet, reinforced vault built into the cabin's stone foundation. A discovery I made using a small, unmarked key tucked into the binding of his favorite adventure novel. It was a fortune that vastly surpassed anything I had ever imagined, far more than the Finch family's most avaricious dreams. This wasn't just pocket change. It was a substantial, liquid fortune, expertly concealed and secured. I spent my evenings reading his letters, not just the initial one, but a series of journal-like entries detailing his plans, his reasoning, his observations of the family's escalating greed. He wrote about his disappointment in his children, who had become strangers, consumed by their desire for more, blind to the true legacy he wished to leave: integrity, wisdom, and a love for things beyond material gain. He detailed Marcus's deceptive return, how he had seen through the thinly veiled charm, the manipulative tactics, the calculated flattery that had ensnared the rest of the family. He knew Marcus was a wolf in sheep's clothing, sent to exploit his weakened state. "He will stop at nothing," my grandfather had written, "to consume all that I have built. But he will never consume what I truly value, for that is not for sale, nor is it within his grasp." The letters also contained a series of coded instructions for his trusted legal contacts, the ones who would acknowledge the living trust. He detailed the specific passphrase I would need to provide, a phrase that combined an obscure Latin proverb he often quoted with a personal anecdote only I would know. Also provided unique identifiers, a specific series of numbers that corresponded to specific constellations on certain dates, a subtle nod to his love for astronomy and his belief in the universe's, quote, order. It was a foolproof system, designed by a brilliant mind to ensure his final wishes were honored, bypassing any attempts at manipulation or legal challenges from his greedy relatives. The weight of this responsibility, this profound trust, settled over me. It wasn't just about newfound wealth, it was about honoring my grandfather's legacy, fulfilling his final, brilliant act of defiance. He had entrusted me with his truth, with his rebellion against the very system he had built, a system that had, ironically, corrupted his own children. I knew I couldn't keep this discovery a secret forever. The wealth, the land, it was too significant. But I also knew I had to approach it carefully, strategically. My family, particularly Marcus, would be furious, vindictive, and relentless once they discovered the truth. They would attempt to invalidate everything, to smear my name, to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. I needed to gather my resources, to plan my next move with the same meticulous care my grandfather had shown in setting this up. My first step was to contact his trusted legal contacts. The letters provided their names and cryptic hints about how to reach them. One was a retired judge in a quiet coastal town, another a reclusive archivist in a bustling European city, and a third, a former business associate now living in a remote mountain retreat. It would require careful planning, discretion, and a significant amount of travel. I spent my days in the cabin not just reveling in the discovery, but meticulously organizing the documents, planning my next moves, sketching out strategies, and absorbing the wisdom my grandfather had left behind. As the sun began to set on my third day in the cabin, casting long golden shadows through the trees, I looked at the map, now a symbol of liberation rather than a puzzle. The X marked not just a physical location, but a turning point in my life. I had followed his map, not for monetary gain, but for meaning, for understanding. And in doing so, I had found not just a fortune, but a profound validation of my worth, a deeper connection to the grandfather who had loved me unconditionally, and the undeniable truth that the true inheritance is not always what you expect to find. The game was indeed far from over. It was about to begin, and I, Elara, armed with my grandfather's wisdom and his hidden legacy, was ready to play. The crisp air of the cabin, permeated with the scent of aged paper and pine, filled me with a quiet resolve. The initial shock of discovery had morphed into a steely determination. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. They would tamper with the official will, my dear, but they would never suspect the backup plan. They would never follow the map, because they would never believe there was anything of true value in it. They would only see a piece of paper, a joke. His foresight was both astonishing and heartbreaking. He had seen their greed, their contempt, their absolute inability to perceive value beyond a tangible, quantifiable sum, and he had meticulously exploited it. My first priority was to secure the physical assets. The gold and silver bars, gleaming dully in the light of my flashlight, were substantial. While the cabin vault was cleverly disguised, it wasn't impenetrable against a determined professional theft. Using the resources mentioned in his letters, I located a discreet, highly reputable security firm specializing in high-value asset transport and storage. They operated with extreme confidentiality, accustomed to dealing with clients who valued discretion above all else. After a series of coded exchanges, verifying the passphrase my grandfather had left, and providing the unique numerical identifiers, they agreed to my request. Within a week, under the cloak of darkness and with meticulous planning, the precious metals were safely relocated from the cabin vault to a high-security, offshore facility. A move that would be virtually impossible to trace by even the most thorough investigators. This initial step, executed with precision, was crucial in fortifying my position. With the physical assets secured, my attention turned to the legal side of the inheritance. My grandfather's letters had provided cryptic hints about 3 trusted legal contacts: a retired judge, a reclusive archivist, and a former business associate. These were not conventional lawyers, but individuals bound by a deeper loyalty to Arthur Finch. People he had helped, whose integrity he trusted implicitly. He had carefully cultivated these relationships over decades, knowing that one day he might need their unwavering support. My first journey took me to a quiet coastal town, several states away, where I found Judge Eleanor Vance, now in her 80s, living in a charming, secluded cottage by the sea. She was a formidable woman, her mind as sharp as ever, her eyes holding a deep, knowing intelligence. I presented myself, used the specific passphrase, and provided the unique identifier based on a rare astrological chart my grandfather had taught me to read. Her initial skepticism, a professional caution, slowly melted into a knowing smile. "Arthur always was a man of surprises," she said, her voice raspy with age but firm. "He spoke of you often, Elara. Said you had a spirit wild enough to navigate his labyrinth." She confirmed the validity of the irrevocable living trust, confirming it was designed to withstand any legal challenge, a legal masterpiece crafted by Arthur Finch to bypass the grasping hands of his children. She assured me she would lend her full support, offering her expertise and network if my family attempted to contest the will. Her quiet conviction was a powerful reassurance. Next, I flew to a bustling European city, tracing the footsteps to a reclusive archivist, Monsieur Dubois. He was a small, unassuming man, surrounded by mountains of ancient documents in a dusty yet meticulously organized archive. He initially seemed wary, his gaze sharp and piercing. But upon hearing the specific code phrase, a forgotten Latin proverb about enduring truth, and seeing the unique symbol my grandfather had drawn on the back of one of his early botanical sketches, his demeanor softened. "Ah, Arthur," he whispered, a rare smile touching his lips. He was a true connoisseur of hidden histories. He confirmed that he held original, authenticated copies of the living trust deed, meticulously cross-referenced with various international land registries, ensuring no loopholes existed. He possessed the digital backups and paper trails that would prove the legal transfer of the land and assets, records that were virtually impossible to fabricate or deny. He promised to release these authenticated documents only upon my direct instruction, offering a crucial layer of protection against any attempts to invalidate the trust. My final contact was perhaps the most challenging to reach. A former business associate, once a ruthless competitor, now a reclusive philanthropist living in a remote mountain retreat in the Himalayas. Reaching him required a long, arduous journey involving multiple flights, a jeep ride over treacherous terrain, and finally, a several-day trek through breathtaking but challenging landscapes. When I finally found him, a man named Rohan Sharma, his face etched with the wisdom of a hermit, he greeted me with an unexpected warmth. He recognized the unique symbol I presented, a stylized drawing of a phoenix rising from ashes, a symbol my grandfather had adopted after a particularly brutal business setback, and the passphrase, a personal anecdote only he and my grandfather would know about, a risky joint venture from their youth. He confirmed that he was the financial architect behind the discreet acquisition of the land and the strategic, untraceable transfer of funds that had been used to acquire the precious metals over the years. He possessed the untraceable financial records, the intricate web of transactions that showed the true provenance of the funds, deliberately obfuscated to avoid detection. He offered his continued, silent support, assuring me that he had built-in safeguards to ensure the assets remained immune to any attempts at seizure or discovery by my family. Returning to my apartment, I felt a renewed sense of strength, a quiet power simmering beneath my skin. The puzzle pieces were now fully in place. I had secured the physical assets, and the legal framework was ironclad. My grandfather's genius had outwitted them all. The cabin, now empty of its precious contents but still rich with his spirit, remained my sanctuary, a tangible symbol of his enduring love and wisdom. I spent a few more days there, not for any material purpose, but for emotional replenishment, drawing, writing, simply existing in the space he had created for me. The time had come to reveal my hand. I arranged a meeting with Mr. Abernathy, my grandfather's lawyer, under the guise of discussing some minor details regarding the estate. The meeting was set for a week later, back in the same opulent yet stifling library where the will had been read. I knew my family, particularly Marcus, would be present, their curiosity piqued by any mention of the estate. The day of the meeting arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension. The air in the library crackled with barely contained anticipation. My parents, Aunt Beatrice, Uncle George, and Marcus were all there, their faces a mixture of skepticism and thinly veiled apprehension. Marcus in particular looked smug, confident in his newly acquired fortune, clearly viewing my presence as an irritating, yet harmless formality. Mr. Abernathy began, his voice dry and formal, discussing some minor financial reports. I waited for my moment. When he paused, I cleared my throat, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor in my hands. "Mr. Abernathy," I began, "I believe there are some further details regarding my grandfather's estate that need to be addressed, specifically concerning a living trust he established years ago." A ripple of confusion, then dismissive murmurs, spread through the room. My mother scoffed. "Elara, dear, we've been through this. Grandfather left you an envelope. A map, was it? We all had a good laugh about it." Marcus leaned forward, a condescending smirk on his face. "Yes, Elara. Perhaps you've been out in the woods too long. The will was clear. Everything goes to me." I met his gaze, my own eyes holding a calm, unwavering conviction. "Perhaps not everything, Marcus," I said, my voice gaining strength. "My grandfather, Arthur Finch, was a man who understood the value of foresight. He knew the official will would be contentious. He also knew his true legacy might need to be protected from certain intentions." I paused, letting my words hang in the air, allowing the subtle implication to sink in. Mr. Abernathy looked at me, a flicker of something in his eyes, a dawning comprehension. He was a professional, loyal to his client's true intentions. "Elara, are you referring to the secondary provisions Arthur had hinted at over the years?" His voice was low, cautious. "I am," I confirmed, pulling out a sealed envelope from my briefcase. It contained the initial, notarized deed of the living trust and a letter from Judge Vance, confirming her involvement and the authenticity of the trust. My grandfather, recognizing potential challenges to his official will, meticulously established an irrevocable living trust years ago. This trust bypasses probate and legally transfers all assets contained within it to me, without dispute. I handed the envelope to Mr. Abernathy. As he opened it and began to read, his eyes widened, his professional composure momentarily faltering. The color drained from my parents' faces. Aunt Beatrice gasped, a strangled sound of disbelief. Uncle George slumped in his chair. Marcus, however, his face contorted in a mask of sudden, cold fury, rose to his feet. "This is a fabrication," he snarled, his voice losing its charming veneer, revealing the predatory nature beneath. "A forgery. My grandfather would never have done such a thing. This is a pathetic attempt to steal what is rightfully mine." I met his anger with calm precision. "On the contrary, Marcus, my grandfather foresaw this reaction. He referred to it as his backup plan. This trust includes the land upon which his private cabin stands, a property he acquired discreetly over many years. And within that cabin, safely transferred to a secure, offshore location months ago, are millions in precious metals, all legally conveyed to me through this trust." A stunned silence descended upon the room, broken only by Aunt Beatrice's choked sob. The implication was clear. While they were squabbling over the official will, a vast portion of Arthur Finch's true wealth, his carefully guarded legacy, had been quietly, irrevocably transferred to me. Marcus, his face pale with rage, seemed to deflate, the full weight of the deception hitting him. He had been outmaneuvered, outwitted by a man he had underestimated, and by the granddaughter he had dismissed. Mr. Abernathy, having quickly reviewed the documents, slowly nodded, his expression grim but resolute. "The documentation appears to be entirely legitimate, Marcus, and quite impervious to challenge. Arthur Finch was a master strategist, even in his final acts. This trust, established through a network of highly reputable, discreet contacts, appears to be an ingenious, legally watertight arrangement." The room erupted. My parents shouted, demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits. Aunt Beatrice wept openly, her face a crumpled mess of regret and fury. Uncle George stared, his jaw slack. Marcus, however, simply stood there, his eyes fixed on me, no longer filled with contempt, but with a chilling, raw hatred. He knew he had been beaten, not just financially, but intellectually. My grandfather had played a masterful game, and I had been the one to deliver the checkmate. The true inheritance wasn't just gold and land, it was vindication, recognition, and the powerful, undeniable proof that my grandfather's love for me was as vast and as enduring as the fortune he had bequeathed. And the game, I realized, was indeed far from over. This was only the beginning of a profound shift in power, a quiet revolution orchestrated by a man who understood the value of a hidden map. Ooh. The chaotic explosion in the library, a symphony of rage, disbelief, and sputtering threats, was exactly what my grandfather had anticipated. Marcus, his face a mask of chilling fury, seemed to be physically trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer, unadulterated shock of being so thoroughly outmaneuvered. Oh. My parents, after their initial outburst of disbelief, quickly shifted gears, their expressions morphing into calculated concern, of the near of regret now attempting to cover their underlying avarice. "Elara, darling," my mother began, her voice now a saccharine concoction of false warmth, "why would you keep this a secret from us? We're family. Your grandfather would have wanted us to handle this together." The hypocrisy was so transparent it was almost comical. I let them rail, let them plead, let them threaten. Mr. Abernathy, ever the professional, quietly but firmly informed them of the impenetrable legal structure of the living trust. He detailed the various legal safeguards, the chain of command, and the highly reputable, discreet contacts who had verified its authenticity. He laid out the timeline, demonstrating that the trust had been established years ago, long before Marcus's reappearance, meticulously planned by my grandfather in his prime. Arthur Finch, he stated, his voice firm, was a man who left no stone unturned, particularly when it came to his final wishes. This trust is ironclad. The meeting ended in disarray, with my family storming out, their faces contorted in defeat and rage. Marcus, however, lingered, his eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. "You played a good game, Elara," he sneered, his voice low, menacing. "But this isn't over, not by a long shot. I'll find a way." His threat, however, held a hollow ring, a desperate bluff from a man who knew he had been intellectually and strategically outmatched. I simply met his gaze with a calm, unwavering stare, a quiet confidence radiating from me. I had nothing to fear from him. My grandfather had seen to that. Over the next few weeks, the promised legal challenges began. My family, pooling their resources, hired a Daquelan battery of high-powered lawyers, attempting every conceivable angle to invalidate the living trust. They argued undue influence, mental incapacity on my grandfather's part, even attempted to claim the documents were forgeries. But each attempt was met with the unwavering testimony and irrefutable evidence provided by Judge Vance, Monsieur Dubois, and Rohan Sharma. The legal wanda. Documents they provided were flawless, authenticated, and cross-referenced across multiple jurisdictions. The financial trails were untraceable, meticulously obfuscated by Rohan Sharma. The testimonies of my grandfather's trusted associates, each a person of unimpeachable integrity, painted a clear picture of his deliberate intent and his sharp mind even in his later years. Each legal battle was a decisive victory for me, each one confirming the absolute legality and impregnability of the ancre trust. The court battles, though draining, served only to highlight my grandfather's brilliance and their own grasping greed. The media, always hungry for a scandal involving old money and family feuds, caught wind of the story. Headlines screamed about "The disinherited heiress who found a hidden fortune" and "Billionaire's secret will outwits greedy family." My private life was suddenly thrust into the public eye, a whirlwind of interviews and public appearances. I carefully curated my message, focusing not on the monetary value, but on my grandfather's foresight, his love, and the profound meaning behind his actions. I spoke about the concept of true legacy, of valuing wisdom and connection over material wealth. My art, which had once been a private solace, now became a powerful platform for these themes. I exhibited the Faces of the City collection, but also new pieces inspired by my journey, abstract interpretations of maps, portraits of individuals who had found their own chosen families, and symbolic representations of hidden truths, the public response was overwhelmingly positive, resonating with countless individuals who felt the weight of familial expectation or the sting of being undervalued. My relationship with my parents shifted irrevocably. The initial attempts at reconciliation are purely transactional, thinly veiled efforts to gain access to my newfound wealth. Elara, think of your future, my mother would lament. You need us to guide you. We can help you manage this. But I stood firm, having learned the bitter lessons of their true priorities. Over time, however, as my public persona as a philanthropic artist grew, and as their legal battles crumbled, their tone began to change. There was a grudging respect, an unspoken acknowledgement of my independence and strength. They still maintained a certain distance, but the constant, subtle pressure to conform, to be the daughter, finally dissipated. It was an uneasy truce, but a truce nonetheless. Marcus, however, was a different story. His defeat festered, transforming into a deep, consuming resentment. He lost his public persona, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of his public humiliation and the exposure of his opportunistic return. His business ventures, which had been based on his perceived inheritance, collapsed, leaving him deeply in debt. He became a pariah within the very social circles he had once charmed. He attempted to sabotage my exhibitions, spread vicious rumors, and even resorted to petty harassment, but his efforts were toothless, easily exposed, and only served to further highlight his desperation. His threats became increasingly erratic, fueled by alcohol and a spiraling sense of entitlement. He was no longer a cunning adversary, but a pathetic figure consumed by his own bitter defeat. I used my newfound wealth to establish the Arthur Finch Foundation for Creative Independence, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing them with resources, mentorship, and opportunities to pursue their passions without the constraints of financial pressure or societal expectations. It was a direct homage to my grandfather's spirit, his belief in fostering true talent and enabling individuals to forge their own paths. I also established a scholarship program in his name, specifically for students pursuing unconventional fields of study, like art history, philosophy, or environmental science, areas he deeply cherished but which his family had always dismissed as impractical. The land itself, the 200 acres surrounding the cabin, became my sanctuary. I commissioned architects, not for lavish expansions, but for sustainable, environmentally conscious renovations. The cabin remained largely untouched, preserved as a museum to my grandfather's legacy, a place where I could retreat, reflect, and continue to feel his presence. I built a small, modern art studio nearby, integrated seamlessly into the landscape, a place where I could create without interruption, inspired by the profound quiet and natural beauty that now surrounded me. The land, became a living canvas, a source of endless inspiration for my evolving artistic style. I invited my chosen family to visit the cabin often. Alex, with his keen eye for design, helped me conceptualize the studio. Chloe and Ben brought their children, who explored the woods with wild abandon, their laughter echoing through the trees, breathing new life into the sacred space. Professor Davies, his eyes twinkling, spent hours poring over my grandfather's book collection, unearthing forgotten insights and sharing his scholarly wisdom. They were my constant, unwavering support system, celebrating my triumphs and grounding me in my purpose. Life found a profound sense of balance. The material wealth was a tool, a means to an end, never the end itself. It allowed me the freedom to pursue my art without commercial pressure, to give back, and to honor my grandfather's true values. The hidden cabin, once just an X on a map, had become the epicenter of my world, a testament to a love that transcended death, a sanctuary of authenticity. Years passed, my art flourished, gaining international recognition for its unique blend of introspection and social commentary. The Arthur Finch Foundation became a beacon of hope for countless young creatives, nurturing talent and fostering dreams that might otherwise have been extinguished. The controversies surrounding my inheritance slowly faded into history, replaced by the quiet respect for my work and my philanthropic endeavors. Marcus vanished from the public eye, his name only occasionally appearing in the society pages in connection with his mounting debts and erratic behavior. He was a cautionary tale, a stark contrast to the legacy my grandfather had truly built. I would often return to the cabin, spending days in solitude, reading my grandfather's letters, walking the well-worn paths through the woods. Each visit was a reconnection, a quiet communion with the man who had loved me fiercely enough to engineer a rebellion against his own bloodline. The final letter, which I kept tucked into the photo album, held a poignant message. "Remember, Elara," he had written, his handwriting fainter on the aged paper, "the greatest treasure is not what you possess, but what you become. And the true inheritance is not measured in wealth, but in the ripple effect of your spirit, in the lives you touch, in the meaning you create." His words resonated deeply within me. I had been cut out of his will, deemed unworthy of a material legacy by those blinded by greed. But my grandfather, with his extraordinary foresight and profound love, had left me something far more valuable. A map, a challenge, a secret inheritance that led me not just to a fortune, but to my true self, my purpose, and a life rich in meaning and connection. The last laugh, it seemed, belonged to the quiet artist, and the brilliant, eccentric old man who believed in her all along. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that his legacy, through me, would continue to flourish, creating ripples of positive change long after the whispers of old money and family feuds had faded into the distant hum of history. The game had not just ended, it had transformed into a beautiful, enduring masterpiece.